I am so very glad to be with you all this morning, as there are so many things, as you've heard, going on in the Bay Area at this time. I give thanks that we are all able to be here in community this morning. Before we dive into this morning's message, I'd like to set the stage for what is one of my favorite scripture passages in the entire Bible. After all, I want it to become one of your favorites too. No pressure though. This morning's passage, found in 1 Corinthians chapter 11, verses 17 through 26, is part of a letter written about 40 years after Jesus' ministry. It is one of many pieces of correspondence that would eventually be written between Paul and these people, in between the time he actually spent in Corinth. There are two main groups of people. First, the author Paul and his assistant scribe, and second, the recipients of the letter. Gentile people, not Jews, in house churches, nicknamed First Church Corinth by a favorite professor of mine. Finally, this all takes place somewhere called Corinth, in what is modern-day Greece. In short, it's a letter from Paul to non-Jews of First Church Corinth, not too long after Jesus was walking around. Hope everyone's with me so far. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11, Paul says, "When you come together as a church, I hear that there are divisions among you. When the time comes to eat, each of you goes ahead with your own supper, and one goes hungry, and another becomes drunk." Looking at the scripture today, it seems that what the people of First Church Corinth were doing was not the kind of coming together that Jesus had modeled less than 40 years before. However, if we dig deeper, we figure out how, in a matter of just a few years, First Church Corinth managed to find themselves somewhere so very far from Jesus' model of community. In some ways, society that then was similar to society today. It was about who you knew and who owed you favors and who you owed favors. It was very hierarchical. What the people are doing, according to whomever reported to Paul, seems to be simply following the structure and values that kept their society functioning smoothly. So when they were coming together to share a meal as a community or partaking in communion, it didn't even necessarily seem like a problem to some of them, that some of them were having food and drink before they even got to the table. I mean, why would it? Every single day of their lives, they behaved in this exact same way. Kind of like table manners. Every single day, we behave in some of the same ways when it comes to eating food at a table. Now, these table manners depend largely on culture and where you live now. And these locations and culture dictate what table manners you find acceptable and may practice almost unconsciously every day. Table manners change depending on culture in the same way the people of First Church Corinth's manners around communion were determined by their cultural context. For example, here in the U.S., it is generally considered rude to chew with your mouth open. And an increasingly forgotten table manner is that if you have a bunch of utensils at your place setting, you use the ones from the outside in. And it's pretty common to avoid reaching for that basket of rolls, instead asking them to be passed to you. If you're anything like me, that particular table manner ensures you don't end up with your drink in your lap. In Russia, it's considered rude to eat and rest a hand in your lap while doing so. And in Italy, one should refrain from asking for extra cheese, particularly if it's to put atop pizza or seafood. These rarely spoken of table manners reflect the actions society deems acceptable. In the same way, the table manners of First Church Corinth reflected the actions Corinthian society deemed acceptable. But Paul's letter to them is telling them that unlike what society deems acceptable, for disciples of Jesus, a communion table where some people have a lot while others have none is no communion table at all. When Paul is rebuking behavior of the people of First Church Corinth surrounding communion, Paul is not rebuking only that behavior, but rather how that shapes what community looks like for all involved. He is saying that Jesus' grace for all is transformative. And if you buy into that, then your life, not ending with the communion table, but beginning with it, should be transformed. The grace that Jesus freely gives, and which today those in the Wesleyan tradition lift up as paramount to our faith, should be expressed toward one another when everyone comes together at the table. If anyone understood the transformative nature of grace, it would definitely be Paul. Paul walked and talked this amazing life of discipleship, but he certainly didn't start out that way. When we first meet Paul, we hear about this other life that Paul has had. His previous livelihood brought into the systemic oppression called persecution of those deemed other. So for someone like that to encounter God's grace and find their entire life transformed, it should remind his audience that there is no transformation God cannot bring about. There is no life beyond redemption through God's grace. Now, that sounds really wonderful, but I'm going to get really honest with you for a second. I find that really hard to believe. It's not that I think that your average Alex or Joe or Susan can't be transformed. It's that there are people out there whom I have a really hard time fathoming as a recipient of God's grace. And that's the scandalous thing about God's grace. It is not based on worth. When God handed Jesus over and Jesus died, it was not just for those whom society deemed worthy, but for all of creation. Paul is saying that if you want to lift up God's name, if you want to proclaim God's name to others, then it needs to be not only in the words that you speak, but in your actions, starting at the table and rippling into every area of your life. I can't imagine being in First Church Corinth on the receiving end of that message and hearing that the structures and systems that my entire life is built upon and dictated by should be torn down, or that the structures and systems that the larger society mandates or that I benefit from should be ignored. That I should risk all that I have just to include someone else at the table. Yet Paul argues that if you have been truly transformed by God's grace, then there is no other way to show others God's grace. Coming together at the table in community, also known as communion, should serve as a reminder that all are welcome to partake in the scandalous message of God's grace. As we read in verses 24 and 25, Paul repeats Jesus' call to gather at the table together, sharing bread and drink in community, in remembrance of him. This is Jesus reimagining table manners. With Jesus, there is no eating while others starve. Remembering Jesus rightly demands standing in solidarity with those whom the writer of Matthew refers to as the least, the lost, the lonely, and the left out. When we recall the memory of Jesus, stripped of everything close to him and nailed to a cross, given up by God for all of creation, It is within this context that we find ourselves hearing Paul's message today. I can't help but think that for all of the centuries since Paul and First Church Corinth received this message, our society has a lot of the same expectations when it comes to acceptable societal norms and hierarchical structures. I think if we look closer, it also has a lot of the same systemic sins. There is still here in America, in California, accepted hierarchies between classes, races, abilities, and disabilities. There's still an acceptance of a school-to-prison pipeline for people whose skin is darker than mine, or environmental waste areas in backyards where people live in areas that aren't as nice as mine. I think if you sit with yourself for a moment, you too might think up an area or two in your life that there's a societal norm or table manner that prohibits all of us from partaking in this feast together. There are even these systemic sins in churches. I know that's hard to believe because this church is made up of entirely perfect people. I'm kidding, of course. It doesn't take a very detailed look at this church or into the United Methodist denomination to discover these accepted methods of making someone an other. These church-sanctioned ways that when we come together as a church, there are divisions among us, and we exclude some at the table. The United Methodist Church, like other denominations, has what is called polity and doctrine. Polity is a fancy name for the organization and practices, and doctrine are the beliefs held and taught by our denomination. Many of you may be unaware that the United Methodist Church as a denomination is trying to determine, under the muddled terms of polity, doctrine, and issues, what exactly we mean when we say that all are welcome to partake in the scandalous message of God's grace. In February of this year, our denomination held a special session of General Conference to examine paragraphs in the Book of Discipline concerning human sexuality and to explore what exactly the UMC means when we say that all are welcome to the table. What we seem to have come away with is that some are only welcome to the table if they don't take up too much room or if they sit on the ground and forgo a chair. Paul tried to show the people of First Church Corinth that a communion table where some people have a lot while others have none is no communion table at all. When God handed Jesus over and Jesus died, it was not just for those whom society deemed worthy, but for all of creation. In this time when American society and our denomination seem more divided than ever, communion should serve as a reminder that all are welcome to partake in the scandalous message of God's grace. This scripture has a message for us. There is nothing that excludes a member of creation from God's grace. Furthermore, as disciples of Jesus Christ, we have a responsibility to ensure that societal table manners don't take precedence over a message that all are welcome. We have a responsibility to look around and say, no, these ways in which we eat while others starve, these ways in which we get drunk while others thirst, these ways in which our church excludes people from the table are not okay, and it ends here. That is, of course, easier said than done. To be the change, we must first reflect on how we, both individually and as a whole, invite people to the table and show them God's grace. Do we extend that invitation to all? Or are there some, like in First Church Corinth, who are shunned because of our table manners? One of the ways I recently observed people here at Embrace reflect on this was through talking about the church app that's currently being designed. and the conversation that's occurring around accessibility regarding the app. Did you know that there are fonts that are easier for dyslexics to read than others? Or that certain app functions aren't understood by tech that reads screens aloud to people who are blind? Being mindful of accessibility while designing our church app is one way to be sure that everyone is fully included at the table. What about individually? Did you know that just one supportive adult cuts the chance an LGBTQ youth will attempt suicide by 40%? That's what it looks like to remind someone that all are welcome to partake in the scandalous message of God's grace. We have a duty to spread the scandalous message of God's transformative grace for all, and it needs to start at our communion table, not end with it. It needs to be rooted in discipleship. Our table is being challenged by those whom we've excluded in the past. We need to hear the way these voices are speaking to all of us now. Like Paul spoke to First Church Corinth, these systems of oppression are not okay, and as a church, we need to be the change. Amen and amen. I invite you all to join me in a time of prayer. Heavenly gracious God, I lift up everyone here today that they may know the grace that you have bestowed upon them. I invite your presence to be felt here, and I ask that these people, as they go forth into the world, would bring your grace to others, not just to those to whom bringing grace is easy, but to everyone. I ask this in your Son, Jesus Christ's precious name. Amen.